This is a show that I put together over the last couple years. It started in 2008, and this is the way that I already started off because Charles Darwin's a controversial guy. Strangely enough, people protest outside the biology department at colleges, but they don't protest outside the physics department. So I'll tell you a bit about how this whole thing got started, because I get raised eyebrows when I tell people what I do. I popularized science using hip-hop music, and I sure didn't design this career for myself. I didn't consider this a very realistic prospect. Wouldn't have even occurred to me, actually. But I was a literature student in university, and I was also an avid hip-hop fan and sort of aspiring rap artist as a late teenager. And I got it into my head that if we study Chaucer and we study Shakespeare, we need to start studying Jay-Z and Eminem, because these guys are doing what Chaucer and Shakespeare did for their time, which is tell oral narratives in a live performance context with a competitive framework, and they're basically creating a visceral experience for audiences like Shakespeare did and like contemporary poets who try to publish don't do so much. So I made this argument in my thesis, and then I wrote the show, the Rap Canterbury Tales, to try and sort of bring it to the people. And I was touring around the UK doing this Rap Canterbury Tales show, sort of bringing Chaucer to the masses. And this geneticist happened to see it. And his name is Dr. Mark Palin. He studies bacterial genomics at the University of Birmingham. And he contacted me in September 2008. And he said, "Bubba, I've seen your Rap Canterbury Tales show. I think it's very good. Next year is Charles Darwin's 200th birthday, and I'm organizing a special celebration on Darwin Day. I'm going to have scientists giving lectures, and I need some entertainment. Could you write me some evolutionary rap songs?" In fact, his exact words were, "Would you be able to do for Darwin what you did for Chaucer?" So the reaction that produced in me was, dun, dun, dun. Yes, I will. So I had about 5 months to put this whole thing together, and basically what it was it was a challenge that he put to me. He said, "I want you to try and capture evolutionary biology in rap songs," but there was also a condition attached, because Dr. Palin said, "This project is funded by the British Council. Now, if I am going to put you in front of these esteemed biologists, if I am going to give your rapping this veneer of respectability, then you first have to send me drafts of your lyrics so I can correct them for scientific accuracy." So all winter I was sending emails to this geneticist with my rap lyrics, and he was coming back with corrections, which means at the end of this process, I have the first ever hip-hop show that's peer-reviewed. So if you've ever wondered what peer-reviewed rap sounds like, you're about to hear it. And what this actually, the point that this really gets to is that don't make the mistake of thinking that my lyrics were intelligently designed by me, because they weren't. They're produced through an evolutionary process. All right, so I'm starting in the exact same place that Charles Darwin started with the concept of artificial selection or human-guided evolution. So here's an a cappella intro to the Rap Guide to Evolution for you. Welcome to the Charles Darwin bicentennial, +1. Now, why does everybody think this guy is so special? This guy, Charles Darwin, merely because a man was born 2 centuries ago who, as far as anyone knows, was the first to recognize the underlying pattern behind the pageant affectionately known as life on this planet. See, Darwin was the first to understand it. He was the first to translate his amazement at the wonder of life into a way to explain it. So this is a celebration of Darwin's greatness in the form of a rap. Brah! Some would probably say a debasement. I would say be patient. Just think of this as a manifestation of the evolutionary equation, as a recapitulation of life, a reenactment. Okay, so how do you go from amoebas to rappers? You open the Origin of Species and you read its chapters. The first chapter, Artificial Selection, is about the impact of people's actions on farm animals, pets, ducks, cows, dogs, domestic crops. Where did they come from? Well, they came from original stocks of wild animals and plants which were selected by farmers and thus became the effect of their cause. But of course, not every selection was conscious. Still, even if breeders in ancient Egypt couldn't see this and had no idea how to rework the features of a species of sheep or increase the sweetness of their peaches every season when they chose to seed it or to feed it or to breed it or to weed it out and delete it because they didn't see it as needed, whether the preferences in question were for bigger chicken breasts or whippets with a thinner midsection or if it was just an inner predilection to pick the best in any mixed collection, that's artificial selection. But there is nothing artificial about domestication. Ant colonies keep domestic aphids. It's just an arrangement where one hand washes the other. We protect the cow, and the cow offers the udder. And even if there's never a conscious discussion, if our little selections and little preferences can change and enhance the critical differences between wild and domestic breeds over the centuries, well then maybe that can explain everything. See, in nature, it isn't us that makes the selections. It's just survival and reproduction in the midst of competition, where slight differences that arise randomly get selected by the pressures applied environmentally, and eventually species divide like a family tree into everything alive, from a tiny fly to a huge manatee to humanity. So how does this apply to the craft of the MC? Yo. That's probably what you're thinking, right? All right, well, evolution, they say, is an algorithmic process. It requires three components only: variation, selection, and heritability. If there are differences among individuals, if those differences are passed on generation to generation, and if those differences have consequences in terms of their survival and reproduction prospects, you will, by definition, have natural selection. So let's see if variation, selection, and heritability are present in that bizarre ecosystem known as hip-hop music. All right. Of course, variation can be found in the styles on display. I mean, rappers all have different techniques when they're on stage, right? Like, say ho, etc. And the results can be seen in the audience's face. Like, for instance, at this moment, you all look amazed, like guppies removed abruptly from their aquatic space. Some of your minds are racing over questions of style and race and genre and time and place, and some of your eyes are glazed, like, for God's sake, how long will this take? But if you all feel that way, then soon I'll be replaced by someone more entertaining, like maybe Lil Wayne. See, this is the rap version of the doctrine of Malthus. Too many MCs, not enough mics. It's the proportion of hungry mouths to food resources in the form of captive audiences, where crowds of two or more will always be at least half as common as performers. Can you see the mathematical problem? There's a shortage. But survival on stage is a non-random process, because those who get massive responses, like say ho, etc., will tend to influence those who aspire to get massive responses, like say ho. So if you say I sound like, for instance, I don't know, if you say I sound like Eminem, what do you think? Do I sound like Eminem? Hate it when people say that. If you say I sound like Eminem, I'll say that's preposterous. But if you catch me grabbing my crotch and acting obnoxious, then I might have to acknowledge that what you're watching is a form of imitation modified by experience, which is pretty similar to the genetic basis of inheritance, heritability, except it's part Darwinism and part Lamarckism, with genes and culture co-evolving as we rock to the rhythm. But whether you think cultures really evolve, or if it's just a silly metaphor that's pretty but false, or whether you've never even thought about that, I still think Darwin can teach us a lot about rap, because it's all about that competition for status with intricate language delivered in battles, and it's all about getting that fitness advantage and the different adaptive behavior patterns that have us acting crazier than pheasants mating dances. But hey, that's natural selection. So just sit back and listen, and you'll witness the evolution of the rap profession. Thank you. So the first thing that I wanted to know when I started researching evolutionary biology is how does it interact with human behavior? How can we understand it in a visceral way that makes it seem relevant to us? So, and one of the ways that I found that was possible to do this is with something called evolutionary psychology, which evolutionary psychology can be a very controversial topic. It's basically the idea that human behaviors and attitudes and beliefs have themselves been shaped by natural selection, just like our organs and our physiology. I'm not going to try to redeem the whole field, but I'm going to just show you one study, and I thought this was specifically appropriate for this conference because it comes from the city of Chicago. It's from a book called Homicide, and what they did is some psychologists cross-referenced homicide and violent crime rates in various neighborhoods in the city of Chicago, and they looked at how they compare to other social statistics. Here is the homicide rate compared to the life expectancy at birth. Notice how low life expectancies predict high violent crime and murder, and vice versa. Now, what they argue in this book is that basically what we call violent crime and murder, what that actually is from an evolutionary perspective is aggressive young men competing for status and respect in environments where they don't have the opportunity to compete using modes of competition that we consider pro-social or positive modes of competition. Music is a mode of competition. The arts is a mode of competition. Sports, education, jobs. If these low-risk forms of competition are available, young men will prefer them. But if they are not available, young men have a predisposition from evolution that says compete with your peers for recognition. And if you don't have the low-risk forms, you will use whatever means are available. And violence is the most accessible form of competition. You can always fight, right? And the reason I'm being very gendered at this point and saying young men instead of young people inclusively, it's not just to make the ladies feel left out. It's because there's a little disparity in the number of murders committed by males versus females around the world. Over 90% of all violent crimes and murders are committed by men, not women, globally around the world. Here's another statistic from that same study. Here is the murder rate plotted against the age with the genders separated. A 10-year-old girl and a 10-year-old boy are exactly as likely to commit a murder. Little angels. Now, what do you think happens at 14? Is that when they've played with enough G.I. Joes to turn into little violent punks? Is that when they get the social messaging? Or is that when the hormones kick in and they hit puberty and the hormones say, find a way to get recognition? Whatever you need to do, right? Oh yeah, and look what happens when they get into their mid-30s, then it tapers off. This is when they get lazy or satisfied or hit middle age or whatever it is, the hormones change, right? And there's a very similar chart for what happens to the girls. There's an almost identical chart for the females, but it doesn't chart murder rates, it charts teenage pregnancy rates. But of course, in that chart, the males would be flatlined. There wouldn't be a little bulge. But basically, they also showed that low life expectancy predicts high teenage pregnancy and vice versa. There's a strong inverse correlation. Unless you think that people in Chicago are just weird in this sense, look at this chart. This is the exact same graph for the entire country of Canada. Same pattern, right? Males versus females, age, killer, etc. So then, when I read this book, I thought, okay, well, what if, I mean, you might agree with that. You might agree with that theory, you might not. You might think, you know, maybe they've got the data wrong, maybe they've got the interpretation wrong. Whether you agree with the theory or not, just think about this. If that's a true explanation of the source of violent crime and teenage pregnancy, doesn't that explain so much about rap music? Man, I listened to rap music my whole life, and all you hear is murder, 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 kill a motherfucker. And I was always like, why are they so mad? I don't understand. But then I read this book, Homicide. And as soon as I read it, I was like, oh shit, now I understand. These are people from dangerous urban environments with low life expectancies and a very unequal distribution of wealth. By the way, that's another strong predictor of violent crime and homicide. And they're just telling us, this is what life is like where I grew up. This is how things are in my neighborhood. If you don't believe me, come check it out. If you dare, motherfucker, what? So then I thought, these are testimonials. So what if rap was by people who went through those hardships, but also people who understood the evolved psychology behind their aggressive emotional responses, and they could use that knowledge to transcend their circumstances? What would rap sound like then? You're about to find out. So, what I've done is I've taken a real rap song. It was written in the mid-90s, around the same time that these psychologists were actually making this book, Homicide, researching the book Homicide. The gangster rappers and the psychologists were not communicating with each other for some strange reason, but they were talking about the same thing. So, this real rap song was written by some guys who did grow up in a dangerous urban environment. I'm talking about Queens, New York in the 1990s. The rap group is Mobb Deep. So what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to remix Mobb Deep as an evolutionary psychology lesson to reveal some of these connections. which means at this point, I'm gonna have to get into my criminal mindset. I'm gonna have to get thugged out. Your mocking laughter tells me you're not convinced. Of course, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take on a gangster persona on the stage. But I'm going to argue that it's not just a persona for me. It's also a persona for Mobb Deep. Slightly less intentional, perhaps, but no less so. In fact, I would argue that it's a persona adopted by any organism of any species that evolves in an environment with high levels of predatory threat in which an aggressive deterrent response could increase their chances of surviving or reproducing. Think about scorpions. Think about tigers. Think about geese. It's all the same, right? Don't fuck with me! So perhaps the gangster persona is the same thing in humans. Of course, for me, this is especially a persona because I grew up in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. Sources of predatory threat for us were low. And when I said that in a presentation once, somebody was like, but what about grizzly bears? To give you a sense of proportion, approximately 100 people have died of grizzly bear attacks in the last 50 years in all of North America. That's like 2 weeks in Queens in the 90s, all right? So our adaptive responses were different. But of course, you can have a persona, or you can have a persona of a persona of a persona. So when I start doing the gangster thing, am I actually imitating Mobb Deep, or am I imitating the suburban white kids I grew up with in Canada who all decided that they wanted to imitate Mobb Deep for some reason? Or maybe I'm imitating a white kid who imitated an Asian kid who imitated Mobb Deep. How many layers does it take to create authenticity? And how do you know you're not a persona? Huh? All right, let's do this. Yeah. I'm sending this one out to all my evolutionary psychologists. I'm talking Cosmides and Tubi, David Buss, Jeffrey Miller. Yeah, we live in this till the day that we die. Survival of the fit, only the strong. There's a war going on outside, no man is safe from. You can run, but you can't hide forever. You come to my block, you'll see some territoriality. A place where kill or be killed is the mentality. But get it straight, it's just a necessary strategy. You gotta play the hand you dealt. You can't magically escape from the habitat that you was born in. 3 homicides in my neighborhood this morning. Cops came and kicked the crooked door in with no warning and started roughing up my young cousin. Shit, she's only 17 and got a bun in the oven plus a concussion. But she ain't done nothing, so keep your mouth shut and don't jump to judgment on the lives we're living. Just close your eyes and listen while I break down some homicide statistics. So if you're thinking the criminal mind is just vacant, you're mistaken. This is calculated risk taking. We living in a situation with a low life expectancy and a major discrepancy between the haves and the have-nots. And you wonder why the padlock on every cash box is smashed off? Come on, you can't call it pathological. Nah, that's illogical. You can try to understand it, but you can't stop it though, not unless you address the root causes, the conscious and unconscious decisions to discount future prospects. Come on, it's obvious the beat keeps bouncing, the homicide rate keeps mounting, which leads to steep discounting and a lot of violence. But it's not a virus, it's a rational response to high-risk environments and short time horizons with high stakes and highly visible prizes. And you wonder why we're criminal-minded? Hey, you can't say we'll get satisfaction if we're patient with self-control and delayed gratification when the only job that pays is casket making, and death is the ultimate planned cancellation. So check the facts and recent data releasing. It shows a pattern of increasing competition. A bunch of young guys all struggling and status seeking and causing the crimes that make the social fabric weaken. And life expectancy also predicts teen pregnancy. The need to leave a legacy genetically will never be completely controlled contraceptively. Yeah, that's transparent. Imagine if your kids would never meet their grandparents unless they followed the Bristol Palin plan for parenthood. And then they say, ooh, these young girls are so damn careless, getting pregnant before marriage, it's such a tragedy. Apparently it's also a reproductive strategy, especially when you can see them adjusting actively when their circumstances change. In both the cases of the young ladies with babies and the male risk takers, we see people adapting to their situations, and it's the same in different places and with different races. This is not about ethical justifications, it's evolutionary psych, and it's just the basics. And still people call this behavior maladaptive because of our reaction when violence happens. But if we really want to change the outcome, then maybe we should just start questioning how it's adaptive. And the bottom line is that iniquity and life expectancy are the ultimate causes of crime and the results of crime. To me, that's true. The two combine together in a feedback loop. But I got some moves to make now, so I'll be back soon. Just don't ask me what I'm about to do. crack, cause I can't say, so it's left to untold fact. Until my death, my ghost will stay alive. Survival of the fit, only the strong survive. That's right, we live in this till the day that we die. Survival of the fit, only the strong survive. Yeah, we live in this till the day that we die. Survival of the fit, only the strong survive. That's right, we live in this till the day that we die. Survival of the fit, only the strong. Only the strong. Only the strong. Yeah, word up. Thank you. Now let's hear about something slightly more inspirational. Sexual selection theory, which we can all relate to in various degrees. And what's interesting about this conference is it has defined design as anything outside of the natural world, but some biologists would say that that peacock's tail was also designed, not by an intelligent overseer, but by an evolutionary process, which you could itself call a designer. And how does sexual selection apply to human mating preferences and human abilities? I think this one might put a new light on everything that we've seen so far in the conference and everything that we may yet see. Not to be presumptuous, but let's try it out. Charles Darwin saw natural selection, not sexual selection, but natural selection, as the most serious cause of evolution. But what was going on with bird songs and peacocks? They follow mysterious laws. They made him feel sick. There was no survival value. But then Darwin had a curious thought. It probably occurred to him when he was trying to explain his theory to a young Victorian blonde whose face displayed a mixture of desire and feverish awe, the immediate cause of which Darwin clearly saw. Yeah. So he said, "My dear, descent with modification comes from the struggle for survival and reproduction. Hence, the reason for some structures must indeed be seduction." What's up? In fact, Darwin's brain was probably one such structure, mostly designed for seduction. Just as peacocks' tails show off the genes of the top males, and likewise the songs of nightingales and the fighting scales of elephant seals and minnows with colorful scales. See, these are all traits that sexual selection has demonstrably shaped through the female preference to get with the fittest mates. But in the case of human brains, that selective pressure goes both ways, male to female and female to male. No measurable difference in intelligence. It's not about male or female. What it's about is this. Pretty much anything in nature that is just for display, just for showing off, and isn't meant to evade or chase predators away, such as camouflage, was probably selected for in a sexual way. That's the definition. Anything in nature that's just for display and has no survival value is probably selected for in a sexual way. But wait, does that mean that this is just such a display? Right now? On this stage? I mean, I really thought I came here with something to say, but is it just a demonstration of my DNA? So what if it is? That's great. How am I doing, ladies? Hey, see? If I was making an argument about the evolutionary roots of language and sexual selection, I could just leave it at the whoop, and the argument would be finished. But I won't leave it there. All right? What's to explain? Yes, perhaps a couple of things. First, when I say that something ornate, like complex human language, originally evolved as a seductive display, I am not arguing that people only use it just to get laid. Darwin leaves Freud in the dustbin, okay? Something that evolved for one purpose can be used for a different purpose today. Like, for instance, I could use a urine stream to put out a fire. That doesn't mean the penis evolved as a bush firefighter. See? This is a theory of language function, a theory of where language comes from. What it's used for now, that is a separate discussion. So which was it? Was complex human language originally a mechanism of survival or reproduction? Complex language now, not simple language like, ooh, look, snake, don't step, but complex language. How would complex language possibly help you survive in the Stone Age? And for instance, how would art or any other kind of design? But we use language as the example. How would complex language help you survive in the Stone Age? Can you talk a predator out of attacking? Can you talk a parasite out of infecting? Can you talk a potential mate into consenting? Potentially. Hence, presenting the grand unified theory of rhyme. Where does rhyme come from? The design of language. I'm talking about Homer, Beowulf, Chaucer, Shakespeare, Alexander Pope, Eminem, and Jay-Z. It's all the same. It goes like this. The mating mind uses lyrical signs combined with wit and wordplay and conversation and humor and different narrative styles to appraise the fitness of mates, both for the purpose of marriage ties and mates of the more temporary kind. See, these are the humble roots of the literary sublime. Human beings are all just Shakespearean primates verbalizing our cherry behinds. But how could we possibly test this theory of mine? Not just mine, also Jeffrey Miller's. Ideally, we could use experimental holding zoos filled with human subjects. Kind of like this room. And with an overhead view, we could observe which breeding pairs reproduce and how often they use their verbal ornaments to seduce. We could even separate them into control groups to see whether the male or the female vocals are more prone to be used in the stimulation of hormones, although it's true that this sort of experiment on humans isn't normally approved outside of nightclubs. If only there existed in a state of nature some cultural group we could study, some cultural group that was preoccupied with making paper and parading half-naked women shaking their moneymakers in front of competitive males displaying mating behavior while trading their creativity for sexual favors. Can anyone think of an example? Or a dozen? If such a group existed, I predict it would be a major player in the entertainment industry and would be in major danger of being overwhelmed by angry player haters. But I may have to save some of my research for later. And how do I answer the charge that I'm participating in this mating dance myself with these dazzling bars? That isn't hard. I plead guilty. See, I worked hard to achieve this ability, and if it also gives my genes visibility for females, then I say so be it. But I confess, it also reveals my unique disability. See, if you look close, my tendency to tell these monkey fables and funny medieval tales, it generally fails to attract any nubile young females. It does attract women a lot, though. And it seems like they're all highly educated and post-menopausal. I know. Isn't it awful? I get mobbed after my Chaucer shows by hordes of grandmas who thank me for making it possible for them to appreciate a hip-hop flow. And you might ask, where are their granddaughters? My guess is they're all at gangster rap concerts. But that's how sexual selection works. Any mutation gets tested first, and if it doesn't get spread, then it gets purged. So this experimental hip-hop mix, where it gets crossed with literature and lectures, will probably get the burial that it deserves. That is, unless you spread it like whispers. Chicka, chicka, chicka. Spread those memes. Thank you.